Elizabeth, so excited to talk to you. How are you?
I'm super excited to chat with you as well, Stephanie. I love your podcast, and it's such an honor to be on. I'm doing well. How are you?
So good. So thrilled to talk to you. I first of all, I should just say I have learned so much from your platform. Clothing, fashion, clearly, if you're looking at me on YouTube right now, not my strong suit, but I've learned so much from you. For anybody who doesn't know who you are or what the Conscious Life and Style platform is about, tell us again who you are, what you do, and how you found yourself interested in dedicating your life to all things fashion, but more importantly, all of that. I want to know those three things, but I also want to know, I'm trying to infuse some like fun in this podcast. Like, tell us your guilty pleasure.
Oh, so much there. Well, first of all, it's an honor that you're following along, and that's always amazing to hear because sometimes being a digital creator, working at home, it feels a bit like shouting into the void and you have no idea what's sticking and what's not. You're just kind of like throwing it out there and hoping for the best. Um, so that's, thank you. And then in terms of like my story and how I got into all of this, I think it starts from when I was just a child. I've always been interested in fashion. Like I had these like fashion designer video games, and then, when I grew up, I was reading Teen Vogue, and I had like Teen Vogue's guide to a career in fashion. But then in high school, I started to realize how it was at odds with my other, passions for sustainability and my interest in human rights. It was in 2013, so I was in high school at that time when I heard about the Rana Plaza factory collapse, where over 1,000 garment workers were killed when a factory when a factory cracked and collapsed. So that was really motivating to me to figure out how I can engage in fashion in a better way. And I sort of put it on the back burner for a little bit. And then the True Cost documentary came out, and that really propelled me to action once again. And I basically just started researching brands. So, like, this was years ago. The sustainable fashion movement was not all what it is like today. And I was just like trying to figure out, like, what is happening in this space. Um, and yeah, I eventually created a blog in order to get an internship at a fair trade fashion brand. And that blog is consciouslifeandstyle.com. So it's, the same URL that it is today. And I started an Instagram, and this was just all to get an internship. But then it sort of propelled from there, started realizing, like, okay, people are resonating with this. Okay, brands are reaching out to partner. Like, maybe I can make money from this. Like, maybe I can make this my career. I mean, that was several years to recognize that. Um, but yeah, my approach has totally shifted. I think before it was just like focused entirely on brands, and while I still love to curate brand guides, my content is a lot more educational now. And I feel like I might have missed some parts of your question, but yes, my guilty pleasure. Oh my gosh. Probably like stupid romance novels. I read like the entire Bridgerton series plus the prequel, and yeah, no shame.
I mean, I haven't read the books, but I have seen seasons one and two, and holy moly, it's really good.
The books are even better. I personally, I think.
So you mentioned that you found a love of fashion at a young age. The fashion industry wasn't aligned with your environmental goals or principles, it would be a better word. What are fashion brands doing wrong in 2022, in your opinion?
Oh man, that is a big question. Yeah, we know there is a lot of greenwashing happening in fashion. And I think that, I would sum it up to say that I think fashion brands are, in terms of big fashion, focusing way too much on just like the material that they're using. It's recycled, organic, whatever, and that's enough for them to be calling it sustainable. And the fabric is just one piece of a very complicated puzzle we never ever hear big fashion brands talking about what they're paying their garment workers, for instance. You know, it doesn't matter how eco-friendly that fabric is. If it was made in a sweatshop, I can't call that sustainable. People are part of the environment, like human beings are part of our world. Like we have to consider the conditions in which that clothing was made as well. And secondly, we never see big fashion brands talking about the scale of production. So it doesn't matter how many of your clothes are made from recycled materials if you're still overproducing and pushing over consumption because, as I like to say, like, even if you're reducing the impact of that garment, let's say, reducing the water impact or the carbon footprint by 20%, let's say, if you're still increasing production, the overall footprint is still getting worse. We have to look at the total. And, you know, some of the biggest fast fashion brands are proclaiming that they are reducing like the per garment impact, basically, but they're still increasing the production. And so overall, their carbon emissions would still be going up, if that makes sense. And I'm sort of oversimplifying it just to kind of like make the point here, but we really have to be thinking about reducing production as well. There's in no world will single use fashion where just buying an outfit for one occasion and even if you're donating after, that's not a sustainable fashion future. Like we have to be wearing what we have more, brands have to be making less, fewer, better things. It's not sustainable if it was made cheaply and it's going to fall apart after two wears. No matter what material it's made of, if it only lasts two uses, that's not sustainable. So those are the two main points I would say is they're not talking about living wages and they're not talking about how much they're producing.
Yeah, I think there's something fundamentally flawed with creating, let's just say, 10,000 of the same shirt if you only have 2,000, maybe 200 people who are going to buy it. That inherently is wasteful. So I want to talk to you more about the made to order movement in a little bit, but the antidote, the solution to the unsustainable fashion industry tends to be something that I've heard from on your platform, something that I've heard on many other fashion forward platforms, which is circular fashion. Uh, Tell us, for anybody who's just turning into this podcast, doesn't know what circularity means, what is circular fashion and what are the principles of it?
Yeah. So I'd love to pull from Ellen MacArthur Foundation's blueprint because I feel like they've done such in depth research on circular fashion and just circularity in general. So their three main principles are design out waste and pollution. And then secondly, keep products and materials in use. And three, regenerate natural systems. So that sounds kind of complicated, but basically, circular fashion is about not wasting and not polluting and keeping what exists in circulation. And then when it's sort of not able to be used anymore, we're going to like repurpose it into something else. And along the way, we're also having a net positive impact. So, like, that's the regenerate natural systems approach. So, sort of like not only doing less bad, but also trying to do more good. And this definition goes far beyond, I think, what we see in most claims about circular fashion. So I think that's important to keep in mind. And I don't know if we're going to talk about this later, but I also sort of created like my own framework of how I view what circular fashion is. Would you like me to go over that now? Okay. So I'm going to take from, yeah, yeah. So, my view of circular fashion is that so basically I have four steps in my mind of what I believe a circular fashion system is. Like, so I listened to the founders of Thousand Fell, a recycling sneaker brand, speak at the Sustainable Fashion Forum, and one of them said something so smart. So I don't, I want to credit them because it wasn't my idea, but they said like a singular fashion brand at this point with current infrastructure cannot be circular because you can't be circular alone. You can't have a singular circular garment. Circularity is like an entire system. So circularity is the entire system. So building a circular fashion industry really will take all stakeholders. So I just want to preface that. Okay, so the four sort of steps as I think about circular fashion are one, produce and buy less. So that's the brands producing less and making fewer, better things. And us as consumers also buying fewer, better things, really thinking through what we're purchasing. And then the second step is to design out waste and design with the end in mind. So this is more from like the designers and the brand perspective. So designing in a way that, limits textile waste. So trying to order the amount of textiles close to what you need, designing in a way that, makes use of as much textiles as possible, maybe reusing, like upcycling things, using a made to order model perhaps. And then also designing with the end in mind. So, not only designing for durability, which is incredibly important, designing for quality, but also what is going to happen to that garment once the person is done wearing it? Is it recyclable? Is it compostable? Do you have a take back program and repair program? Things like that. And then the third step is to extend a garment's life as long as possible. So once it's been produced, hopefully minimizing waste and pollution along the way. So again, like also to step two, I would add like no toxic chemicals. So when I'm talking about waste, not only the textile waste, but also not, putting chemical effluent into the waters. That's also waste. Okay, so the third one is extending a garment's life. I would say that this is one of the most common ones in the slow fashion movement. We talk about repair, we talk about mending, we talk about rewearing, swapping, shopping secondhand, borrowing, maybe renting, loaning, all those things. That's all examples of how we can extend a garment's life. So that is huge and is a big part of the puzzle because no matter how high quality a brand makes a product, if we're not using it to its maximum lifespan, it doesn't matter. It doesn't add up to the circular system. And then the fourth step I would say is to manage the garment's quote unquote end of life because and I hate this like end of life term because I don't think it has to be the end. It's why I'm quoting end. But basically, what do we do with the garment after somebody is done wearing it? And I think that this is where we see a lot of fashion brands talking about their circular strategies. They're talking a lot about textile recycling, for example. And I think it's important to remember that that's not the only solution for a garment's end of life. We also can think about upcycling. We can think about mending and repair to resell. Like sometimes it might be a little bit more of an intensive project to mend that piece and then it can still be resold. Like Patagonia's Worn Wear does a great job with this. They literally sell like I forget what it's called, but they sell like totally like patchwork designs of their clothes and Eileen Fisher does this as well with their Renew program. So I think upcycling is always preferred over recycling. And then another way to manage the end of life that also like never gets talked about is making clothing compostable and then composting it at the end of its life. And there really aren't many brands doing this. California Cloth Foundry is one that I know and love that does make compostable clothing. And I would love to see more of that. So I know that was a lot, but just to like close out, again, a circular fashion system involves all of us. It's the brands producing fewer, better things. It's designers thinking about the end of life from the beginning. It's us as consumers making the most of what we have and what exists. And then lastly, us as consumers partnering with brands and hopefully also with the help of governments making the most out of that garment at the end of its life.
That is such a comprehensive answer, Elizabeth. Thank you so much. And what I hear you saying is that we are all responsible for creating and maintaining a circular fashion industry. The consumers, the manufacturers, the designers, uh, the the people we elect to lead our countries, and everybody in between. But I wonder, though, I just had an interview with Alyssa Couture, and she made the statement that shocked me that 90% of clothing on in the market currently is made of synthetics, fossil fuels based synthetics. And so where do synthetics fall into this conversation? Can synthetic fabrics be part of a circular fashion economy, and if so, how?
Yes, right. Synthetics are a huge part of the fashion industry today. And I have not heard that 90% number, though. I have seen like 60 and 70%, but it's been rapidly increasing. So I guess it wouldn't completely shock me if we were at 90%. But yeah, the latest numbers I've seen are 70%, which is still quite high. But yeah, this is a huge question and a really, really, really important question because I think that and I would say I have two answers, sort of like a realistic answer and then like a dream answer. So I'll start with the dream answer, which is no, synthetics are not really part of a truly circular economy. If we consider that circularity means not polluting, because I don't think anyone has figured out how to create synthetic fabrics or recycle synthetic fabrics without it being a potentially toxic process. So, for instance, we know that synthetics cause microplastics to be released. When we wash synthetics in our washing machines, the microplastics get released, end up in our oceans. But microplastics also get released during production. So, how do you recycle synthetics without releasing microplastics into the environment? And then once you have the recycled microplastics, or sorry, the recycled synthetics into the everyday person's hands, how do you prevent those microplastics from being released when they're washing their clothes? We have microplastic bags, and that's incredible. I use them. I know many people do, but certainly you're not going to get everybody to use them. So, yeah, I mean, we're still losing things along the way. When we're recycling synthetics, like the microplastics are still getting released. And so, how is that part of a circular system when we're still polluting and releasing microplastics into the system? It's hard to see how that can be truly circular. And then, secondarily, most recycled synthetics are not from polyester garments. So, like they're not recycling directly within the fashion system. They're recycling plastic bottles and turning them into fabric. So we're not really achieving circularity within the fashion system. We're not taking used polyester garments and recycling that into another recycled polyester garment. We're taking plastic water bottles, so it's not really circular within the same system. And there's been a lot reported about basically there isn't enough recycled plastic bottles to meet the industry demand. And there's been a lot of fraud. There's been reports, and I can send you this link after so you can add it in the show notes. But basically, there have been investigations finding that a lot of the recycled polyester claims are not even truly recycled, because there is a lot of greenwashing in that area, and there's a lot of fraud because it's a very it sounds really nice and it sounds really good, and brands really want to sound eco-friendly. And so the demand is really rising, and there's not enough to meet that demand. So that all to say, recycled synthetics right now, not at all solution. Um, I was excited about something like that 5 years ago, but I think that we know more now, and that I think it's time to move beyond that and think about something more strategic. So that's like my dream answer is like, no, synthetics are not part of the circular equation. But my realistic answer is that I guess maybe it's marginally better than extracting new fossil fuels. if, assuming that it's not fraudulent claims and they really are recycled materials. So, yeah, it's not a great solution by any means, but yeah, maybe it's marginally better.
Well, yeah, I'm thinking about it's summer here in my neck of the woods, and I am definitely not going to, for everybody else's benefit, I'm not going to wear a bathing suit made of a natural fiber to the pool. And so then if I'm going to buy a synthetic based bathing suit, I guess it is potentially uh, marginally better, like a plastic bottle based swimsuit that's also synthetic than a new fossil fuels created bathing suit.
Yeah, no, no, no. Sorry for interrupting. And just when you said swimsuit, also a lot of swimsuits are made from Econyle, which would say is at least from what I know, information can always change. It is better. They're recycling plastic waste from ocean, so they're like taking fishing nets and plastic waste that has already like made it into the oceans, recovering it and turning it into the fabric. So it is truly like waste that is like polluting our environments. And there also are brands that are super rigorous about vetting where their recycled plastic comes from, which I think is also better. And there isn't really a comparable solution for swimwear yet, or activewear. There's starting to be some solutions like Tencel. I know some brands are using, although that comes with its own problems, right? Because you have to cut down trees to get materials like Tencel that what are wood based. So yeah, I think it all comes down to like fewer better things, and I guess like fabric is part of the solution, but like at the end of the day, what you're gonna wear and like wear and wear and wear and wear again, that's like the best thing, is just to be like buying less, because every single fabric has some sort of impact.
And I do feel as a consumer as though the marketing giants behind these fashion brands, they have their finger on the pulse. They know that consumers are getting a little bit more aware of their egregious, for lack of a better word, policies and actions. And so they're changing their marketing. They're not necessarily changing their behind the scenes, but they are changing their marketing to keep up their bottom line. So, can you talk to me a little bit more about greenwashing in the fashion industry? Is it as rampant as I think it is?
Yes. Yes, I think it's probably even worse than we think it is. And yeah, I think is because yeah, as you said, there's just an increasing awareness around sustainability, and there's all these polls showing that people want to spend their money with companies that are doing things better and are doing things sustainably. So, of course, a company is going to jump on that because they don't want to lose that money. But what are they really doing? And can we trust what they say that they're doing? Or are there some details that they're leaving out? I think that first and foremost, I would just say that, like, if you've fallen into greenwashing, or if you're confused by it, like, there's no shame in that. It's very confusing. I mean, I have been in the sustainable fashion space for like 6 years, and still I'm like, is this greenwashing or is this sustainable? Or you know, was this claim real? And it's challenging because the industry is just so opaque, and we can't even verify these claims even if we tried. And so I try to rely really heavily on like investigative journalism, and I try to read all that I can about the industry to sort of help vet that out, and help my audience a little bit, and also just figure it out for myself. But basically over the years I've learned to like not trust really almost any claim from a big fashion brand. And that isn't to say that there aren't individual people at these brands working their very, very best to improve the system. Absolutely. I think that they are making some genuine efforts. But I think overall, most of these companies have profits prioritized over people and the planet. And at the end of the day, they are most of them are still overproducing, and going back to what we talking about at the beginning, are still not paying living wages to their workers. So, they're doing what sounds good and what looks good, but they're not necessarily doing like the real work. For instance, I think that, and I'll bring this back to circular fashion in a moment, but one of the biggest greenwashing schemes that we see is brands claiming that they are um, carbon neutral or reducing emissions by 50% or whatever. And it turns out that they're just buying carbon offsets, which offsets are part of the, perhaps a strategy. But if that's all that you're doing, that's not really enough to say you're carbon neutral. You're offsetting your footprint. So I think there's a really key distinction between saying we are offsetting our carbon footprint versus saying we are carbon neutral, if that makes sense. So, do you have solar panels in your factories? Are you helping your factories, power their energy with solar panels? Are you, stepping away from synthetic fabrics, or are you just going business as usual and then buying carbon offsets to like have this marketing claim? So that's sort of an example. But coming back to circular fashion and like some of the greenwashing I see with that, I think that, as I was saying before, like textile recycling is, well, like a lot of what these big brands want to talk about. But the reality is that the infrastructure is really, really, really in its infant stages, and they're not really able to recycle as much as they, claim to be able to. And then, secondly, fast fashion brands take back programs. This is also one of their so called circularity initiatives, but that is just complete greenwashing because I have yet to find a fast fashion brand that is actually telling us where these clothes are going. They might vaguely say, like, oh, they're getting like reused or recycled or whatever, but where are they getting reused? Where are they getting recycled? What is your definition of recycling? Because we know as a whole in the United States, when we, for instance, donate clothing to like a Goodwill or Salvation Army down the street, only 10 to 20% of that is getting sold in those specific charity stores. And that number has probably even gone down since those numbers were reported. And the rest is either getting shipped off to somewhere else, which is often the global south, or it is getting downcycled into like rags or insulation, which maybe that's all the textile is good for, but maybe not. Maybe it could have been used for like a higher end recycling, or it really is just getting discarded. And even what is getting shipped off elsewhere might be ending up in landfills as well. So, or most likely a big percentage of it, I should say, is ending up in landfills. Like the OR Foundation is an organization based in Ghana that has done a lot of research, and they found that, 40% of what's being shipped to Ghana from the global north, from the US, Canada, countries in Europe, 40% of that is headed straight to the landfill. And so, where are all these clothes going from the take back programs? And I think that we can really see the intentions behind these take back programs with campaigns like bring your old clothes in and get 20% off your next purchase. They want people to clear out their closets so that they buy more stuff. And people are starting to maybe feel guilty about throwing away their clothes. So these fast fashion brands created a take back programs. They're not altruistic. Again, it's about profits more than it actually is about people and planet. So it's something that looks good, but and it looks like they have good intentions. Maybe someone did along the way, but yeah, I'm still a little suspicious of that. But yeah, they just have these take back programs and recycling programs to convince people to like buy more, which is not the point of circularity. So I know that was a lot there, but
Well, you bring up the point that I, beat into my listeners' heads every week, which is that it's profit above all else. I mean, how easy is it for a fast fashion brand to stick a box? how cheap is it? That would be a better way to say it. How cheap is it for a brand to stick a box in their store and put a sign on it that says recycle here, you recycle, you get 20% off your next purchase. It's easy, but it's also a method of garnering more sales. Um, it's much harder for that same brand to change things at the factory level or at the harvesting level, if we're even harvesting a renewable resource. And so I would say that greenwashing can be quite in your face, as that example that you just aptly gave. But I can also say too, I was sitting I was sitting at my counter drinking my coffee on Saturday morning, reading the paper, feeling so good about myself when I came across an article in the New York Times about the Higgs Index. And if you don't know what this is, listeners, don't worry. I didn't know what it was either. But it's basically a system that was created by retailers to rank the environmental impact of clothes. And so if it's in the Times, I'm guessing we're going to be hearing more about it. It's the Higgs Index, Higgs. It, and if you do more research into the Higgs Index and what it finds, you will learn that this index rates polyester, so a synthetic fiber made from fossil fuels, as one of the world's most sustainable fabrics. So think about that for a second. Like, that is crazy. I talk a lot on this podcast about your spidey sense. Like, if your spidey sense goes off, if something doesn't seem right, like it might not be. So okay, so back to the Higgs index. The Higgs the Higgs excuse me, the Higgs index again says that polyester is more sustainable based on its rating scale than renewable fibers, natural fibers, cotton, linen, hemp, etc. But if you do a little bit more digging, you will find that a lot of the people on the Higgs board are fast fashion brands. H&M is one of them. All these fast fashion brands that mainly use polyester in their clothing. And so greenwashing can be, my point here is greenwashing can be a box in a store, but it can also be so much more pervasive in the creation of a quote unquote third party um, rating scale. And so I guess that brings me to my most important question for you today, Elizabeth, which is, amidst all the greenwashing, amidst all the like changing marketing terms but not changing actual practices, what can you and I do in a consumerist society that really just entices us to buy more at the start of the next fashion season? That's a lot. I know. I'm sorry.
No, it's an important question. It's a big question, but it's a super important question. And I think that yeah, we know that brands individual claims are often just greenwashing. Speaking of like, big fashion with a capital B, capital F, I think that small brands are totally different, like small, slow fashion brands are, and operating in a totally different space. But when it comes to big fashion, individual claims, we know it's kind of often greenwashing. But then, as you were talking about with the Higgs Index, like these so called third party groups that we think are unbiased, we think they're objective, they're still really not because they're industry powered most of the time. And so, yeah, I think and the most pervasive part of that is that even really really well-intentioned brands, well-intentioned designers, whatever, are looking to resources like that. These people want to genuinely maybe be more sustainable, and then they look to something like the Higgs Index and they see that, okay, well, polyester is more sustainable than cotton. I don't know if they say that specifically, but let's say, or wool, or whatever the material is. And so they say, okay, let's choose polyester. So things like that can be really pervasive. So brands claims, can't really trust it. These third party verifications, often can't really trust those either. You at least have to do a lot of deeper research. And so I think we're really left with like, can we develop regulatory bodies that help us navigate through all of this, like the nutrition facts label on our food that tells us how much sugar is in it, what every single ingredient is in there, how many calories, whatever, how much saturated fat, how much, used to be trans fat in foods. And obviously the food industry is still very influenced by industry interests, but like how do we get more oversight from a more objective body? We're living in a world of humans. Like there's no truly unbiased, completely objective source, but I think that one of the key steps we can take is to push for more oversight and things like the Fabric Act that have just gotten introduced in the federal government in the US. The EU just released a circular textile strategy to help clean up the industry a bit. And I think that really legislation like that is the first step that we need to be taking to clean up the industry, because brands will do whatever they can get away with. These industry groups will get away with whatever they can possibly get away with. And I think that policy is really the only way that I see to make like these huge changes. But of course, we can't just stop there. I'm not, I don't think that legislation solves everything. I think that we also need to just continue to educate ourselves and know that, there were things that I thought were sustainable 3 years ago that now I view greenwashing. So, like a conscious fashion journey, just like, an overall sustainable lifestyle journey, it evolves and you're going to learn along the way. And I think it's just really important to keep educating yourself and tuning in to podcasts like this one, and maybe watching documentaries, following people on Instagram, whatever, and just trying to continue to educate yourself and keeping up that spidey sense that you talked about. Like, if something sounds off, do deeper research. Like, I try to fact check everything I say, but like, I'm not perfect by any means. I'm a human being and I'm not proclaiming to know it all, and my views change. Like, people, listeners or audience members, followers have questioned me about things that have caused me to dig a little bit deeper into things. Like, I don't want to pretend like I'm on some like pedestal and like I know everything about sustainable fashion. Like, I also learn from my audience, and I view myself more as just like a vessel to like communicate information, not that I'm some like wise philosopher on sustainable fashion. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, push for legislation, and you can do that with a group like Remake. Remake is an incredible advocacy organization in the United States, and also Clean Clothes Campaign, if you're based in Europe, is an incredible organization lobbying for a better fashion industry. And then, secondly, I would say, stay curious, keep learning, and yeah, question things if they don't sound right.
Right. I would say too, you mentioned that we all have different energy levels, let's say, for lack of a better phrase. I would say, number one, if you've never contacted an elected official before, it's going to be really scary the first time you do it. But then once you do it, a floodgate opens and then you're going to do it all the time. If that's not for you, you can do a lot of things with regard to your own wardrobe that do make a difference. For me, I would say that prioritizing fit over trend has been really powerful for me. So prioritizing fit means buying things that fit me, and or maybe getting them tailored so that they look great every time I put them on, regardless of what trends are going on. And then the other thing too is improving my own sewing knowledge. So my mom, big sewer, she would mend our stuff. She had a sewing room. She had fabric up the wazoo. She would make stuff, mend stuff, and that is a skill that we as a culture are losing. That's not something that's passed down. What happened to home ec, by the way? So prioritize fit, get in touch with your own sewing literacy. Those are my best thoughts. If you want to work within your own closet, you don't want to call anybody, you don't want to email, you don't want to make waves. I understand. Do you have any other thoughts that for for action steps that listeners can take with regard to circularity in fashion?
Yeah, I love that. I love that point about sewing literacy. I think, yeah, I think that that sort of brings me to what I would say, which is find your own unique voice and role in the movement. And one of our contributing writers on Conscious Life and Style, Stella, wrote a fabulous piece on how to find your role in the sustainable fashion movement that I think is really helpful. Basically, takes Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth's framework of how to find your role in the climate movement, which is, figure out where the need is, what you're good at, and I believe what you have the skills for. I hope I have that correctly. But yeah, basically, what are you passionate about and where is there a need? You don't have to do everything. Like, I think I recognized pretty early on that I am not a sewer. And it's so I don't even, I often forget about that. I would totally rather spend the $10 and have somebody else sew it for me because it probably would take me 8 hours to like mend a hole because I'm just really clumsy with sewing. But I love to write and I love to research. And I love to like educate on platforms like Instagram. So like that's my role in the movement. I view as like researching, compiling information and educating. And you might have your unique role something along those lines too. Maybe your role is writing, maybe it's researching, maybe it's graphic design for, a sustainable fashion nonprofit. Maybe you are a really great sewer. Maybe you could, sew your own things and also offer to sew your friends, ripped garments. Um, Perhaps you are super into calling your legislators, like, go for it. Perhaps you're really good at getting groups together. Maybe you join something like Remake's ambassador program and host events and educate your community and speak at nearby universities about sustainable fashion. Like, there's so many ways to get involved. I think that the options are really limitless. And I think that it's easy to feel overwhelmed. Like you have to do everything. And like you just have to find what you're passionate about and where there's a need and sort of like find that connection, if that makes sense. And like right now, I would say like my life is a lot about sustainable fashion because it's my career, but not everybody has that time. So find your unique role in the movement and like what speaks to you most, and then like go for that.
Well, Elizabeth, I think what you're speaking to there is the importance of understanding your skill set and applying it, not just sitting in your house ruminating on how terrible things are looking, but taking your, dare I say, God given gifts and uh, using them for betterment. And so I talked about this on episode 200 of this podcast. What a nice round number, 200. It was called Navigating the Eco Contradiction Minefield. And we'll link to it in the show notes if anybody missed it. But we all have skills. And if we all take our skills and apply them to the best of our abilities, that's where change comes. And so I really thank you for saying that and making that distinction. Tell us where my listeners can find the Conscious Style podcast, the Conscious Life and Style website. Tell us all about it.
Yeah. So the Conscious Style podcast can be found on any podcast app. It's just, yeah, Conscious Style Podcast. And then the website is consciouslifeandstyle.com. And my Instagram is at Conscious Style. And I also have like a weekly newsletter where I share recommendations for articles to read, interesting brands, campaigns to support. So, like, if you're looking to get more involved, I share about all sorts of campaigns in there. Like, there was a recent one about Misguided. This fast fashion brand is having financial difficulties and not paying their suppliers, causing a whole lot of havoc. So, like, campaigns like that, podcasts to listen to, all within like the conscious fashion space. So that's at consciouslifeandstyle.com/ edit. And yeah, I think those are the most important links.
Well, I'll link to them all in this week's show notes. And I just want to thank you so much, Elizabeth, for coming on the show. I learned a lot. I continue to learn a lot from your platform and from following you on Instagram. So thank you so much for giving me 52 minutes of your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Stephanie, and asking such fantastic questions.